Hello space explorers, welcome to Sci-Fi Space. The place where we dive into the most mind-blowing sci-fi stories in the universe. But before we jump into today's epic story, take a second to check if you've subscribed. It's completely free, and it helps bring more sci-fi adventures straight to your feed. Alright, let's get started. Today, we've got a story that'll blow your mind, a weapon so deadly it turns entire armies to dust until humans show up and eat it. Yeah, you heard that right. How does a guy named Richard Maxwell turn an alien death machine into a snack and flip a whole planet upside down? Stick around to the end, because this twist is crazier than anything you've seen out there in the stars. Hit that play button, and let's dive into the madness. Trust me, you won't want to miss a second of this. On the scorched surface of Zoryn, a planet defined by its endless deserts and triple suns, the Zoryth ruled supreme. Their tough, stone-like skin gleamed under the relentless heat, a testament to their resilience in a world where survival meant mastering the harshest conditions. But it wasn't their endurance that made them feared across the galaxy, it was their weapon, plasma dust. A single pinch of this shimmering, crimson powder could dissolve any living thing into a pile of sand in seconds. Entire fleets had crumbled at the sight of Zoryth warships, their crews reduced to dust before they could even scream. To the galaxy, plasma dust wasn't just a weapon, it was a death sentence. That's why the arrival of a human ship in Calthar, the Zoryth capital, turned heads, or rather, cracked a few stony faces in disbelief. The vessel touched down in a swirl of red sand, its engines humming against a dry wind. Out stepped Richard Maxwell, a lanky Earth pilot with messy brown hair and a smirk that didn't quite fit the occasion. He wore a faded flight jacket, hands shoved in his pockets, looking more like a tourist than a soldier. The Zoryth had agreed to an interstellar military training program after decades of tense silence with Earth. It was a fragile diplomatic move, and Richard was their first test subject. General Kale, the Zoryth's highest commander, stood waiting. His towering frame, covered in polished scales that glinted like obsidian, radiated authority. His deep-set eyes narrowed as he sized up the human. "You're the first of your kind to set foot here," Kale said, his voice rough and grating, like sandpaper on stone. "We expect discipline. Don't waste our time." Richard tilted his head, scratching his chin. "Cool place. Hot as hell, though. Got any water around here?" Kale's jaw tightened, a faint crack running through his scales, a sign of irritation he couldn't hide. The human's casual tone grated on him, especially when plasma dust was involved. Kale didn't bother with small talk. He gestured for Richard to follow, leading him through Calthar's military district. The city was a fortress of massive stone blocks, each structure carved with precision and lined with transparent pipes pulsing with plasma dust. It was a sight meant to intimidate, but Richard barely glanced at it. "Looks like a sci-fi movie set," he muttered, kicking a pebble as they walked. "Those pipes, are they full of that dust stuff?" Kale stopped, turning sharply. "Yes. And one leak could turn you into a pile of sand. Respect it." Richard shrugged. "Sure. Seems handy. Does it smell like anything?" That question, innocent, almost dumb, sent a ripple of unease through Kale. Plasma dust wasn't something you sniffed or admired, it was a tool of annihilation. The galaxy trembled at its name, yet here was this human treating it like a curiosity. Kale's scales clicked as he clenched his fists, but he pressed on, determined to keep this exchange on track. Orders from the Zoryth High Council were clear: train the human, strengthen ties with Earth. Still, something about Richard's nonchalance felt wrong, like a crack in a dam waiting to burst. They reached the training compound, a sprawling arena of stone and steel where Zoryth's soldiers drilled with lethal precision. Richard leaned against the railing, watching as a squad fired bursts of plasma dust into holographic targets. The air shimmered red as the dust hit, disintegrating the projections into fine sand. Kale pointed at the display. "That's what you're here to learn. Our weapon has no equal." Richard nodded, but his eyes wandered to the pipes again. "Neat trick. Bet it'd spice up a barbecue." Kale's scales cracked louder this time, a low growl escaping his throat. This isn't a game, Maxwell. One mistake, and you're dust. Richard grinned, unfazed. Relax, big guy. I'm just saying it's impressive. You folks take it pretty seriously, huh? That was an understatement. To the Zoryth, plasma dust was sacred, a symbol of their dominance. Kale had seen it wipe out armies, reduce cities to dunes. Yet this human acted like it was no big deal. It wasn't just ignorance, it was something else, something Kale couldn't pin down. He motioned for a guard to escort Richard to his quarters, a sealed, dry chamber designed for human comfort. Rest up, Kale said. Training starts at dawn. Don't touch anything you shouldn't. As Richard sauntered off, Kale lingered, staring at the pipes. The human's questions echoed in his mind, too casual, too specific. Does it smell like anything? Who asked that about a weapon? He signaled his aide. Keep an eye on him. I don't trust this one. The aide nodded, scales glinting in agreement. Richard Maxwell might have been Earth's pick, but to Kale, he was a puzzle, and puzzles, left unsolved, could be dangerous. The next morning, the training arena buzzed with activity. Zoryth soldiers, their stone-like bodies moving with rigid precision, lined up in tight formations under the glaring light of Zoryn's triple suns. General Kale stood on a raised platform, his scales gleaming as he barked orders. Today was Richard Maxwell's first official session, and the air crackled with anticipation and suspicion. Kale had barely slept, replaying the human's odd comments in his head. Smells like anything. Spice up a barbecue. It didn't add up. No one treated plasma dust like that. No one sane, anyway. Richard strolled in late, hands in his pockets, still wearing that beat-up flight jacket. The Zoryth squad turned as one, their deep-set eyes narrowing at the sight of him. Kale gestured to a spot beside him. You're here to observe, Maxwell. Pay attention. He pointed to a soldier loading a sleek, metallic canister into a launcher. This is how we deploy plasma dust. Compressed at 300 atmospheres, it's lethal within 50 meters. One breath, and your lungs turn to sand. Richard squinted at the demo, then raised a hand like a kid in class. So, what's it taste like? Spicy? Bitter? A murmur rippled through the ranks. Kale's scales clicked loudly, his patience fraying. It doesn't taste like anything because no one's stupid enough to try it, he snapped. It's a weapon, not a snack. Richard shrugged. Fair enough. Just curious. You guys ever tested on food or something? Before Kale could respond, a sharp voice cut in. Enough of this nonsense. Lieutenant Vera, a young officer with fiery red eyes and a temper to match, stepped forward. Her scales bristled as she glared at Richard. You mock our weapon? You mock us? Humans are a disgrace. Richard didn't flinch. Whoa, chill out, Red. I'm just asking questions. No need to get all worked up. Vera's hand twitched toward the dagger strapped to her side, but Kale raised a hand, silencing her. Stand down, Vera. He's here under orders. His tone was firm, but his eyes stayed locked on Richard, searching for a crack in that laid-back facade. Vera huffed, stepping back, though her glare could have melted stone. The tension hung thick, and Kale knew it wouldn't take much to set her off again. The session continued, but Richard's curiosity didn't let up. As a Zoryth squad fired bursts of plasma dust into the air, each shot dissolving a target into a puff of sand, he leaned over the railing, way too close for Kale's liking. Hey, General, how do you keep that stuff from blowing back on you? Wind's gotta be a pain out here. Kale gritted his teeth. The canisters are pressurized and directional. It's not your concern. Richard nodded, but his eyes lingered on the launcher, like he was memorizing it. Kale signaled a guard. Move him back. Now. Things got worse during the safety briefing. Kale stood before a holographic display of a plasma dust canister, explaining its fail-safes. One breach, and this compound becomes a kill zone. That's why only trained Zoryth handle it. Richard, slouched in a chair, piped up again. So, what happens if you, snorted by accident? Burns the nose or what? A few soldiers gasped. Vera slammed her fist on a table, cracking its edge. This is unbearable. He's either a fool or a spy. Either way, he doesn't belong here. Richard smirked. Lady, you need a hobby. I'm just trying to get the full picture. Kale's scales cracked louder than ever. He'd had enough. Maxwell, shut up and listen, or I'll have you locked in your quarters. Richard raised his hands in mock surrender. Fine, fine. You're the boss. But the damage was done. Vera's outburst had lit a fuse, and whispers spread among the troops. He's disrespecting us. Why is he so obsessed with the dust? Kale caught the unease and made a call. Vera, you're on watch duty. Don't let him out of your sight. She nodded, smirking darkly. Gladly. That night, the tension spiked. Richard's quarters, a dry, sealed box of a room set under heavy surveillance. Kale had ordered extra guards, convinced the human was up to something. He wasn't wrong. Inside, Richard pulled a small device from his jacket, a density scanner disguised as a music player. He'd swiped a tiny speck of plasma dust during the demo, palming it when no one was looking. Holding it under the scanner, he muttered, volatile as hell. Wonder if it'd kick up a stew. He scribbled notes, oblivious to the Zoryth guard peering through a slit in the wall. Meanwhile, Vera confronted Kale in his command chamber. He's a threat, sir. I saw him eyeing the canisters like a thief. We should interrogate him hard. Kale rubbed his temple, scales grinding. We can't. High Council wants this program to work. Earth's watching. Vera sneered. Then let me handle him my way. 5 minutes, and he'll spill everything. Kale shook his head. No. We watch and wait. But if he steps out of line again, you'll get your chance. Vera stormed off, her anger simmering just below a boil. Back in the arena the next day, Richard pushed his luck further. During a live-fire drill, he wandered too close to a canister rack, reaching out like he might touch one. A soldier yelled, "Stop," and Vera charged over, shoving him back. You want to die, human? Keep your hands off. Richard stumbled, laughing. Easy, Red. Just checking it out. No harm done. Vera drew her dagger, pressing it to his chest. Next time, I cut first, ask later. Kale arrived just in time, pulling her away. Enough. Both of you, back off. As the day ended, Kale reviewed the footage. Richard's questions, his wandering hands, it wasn't random. He's testing us, Kale muttered to his aide. Or he's after something. Triple the guards tonight. The aide nodded, but Kale's gut twisted. Vera's rage was a problem, but Richard's calm was worse. Whatever the human was planning, it was about to blow this fragile truce wide open. The nights on Zoryn were as brutal as the days, the triple suns replaced by a suffocating darkness that pressed down on Calthar like a heavy lid. Inside his dry, sealed quarters, Richard Maxwell was wide awake, hunched over a small table cluttered with gear. The faint hum of his density scanner filled the room as he studied a speck of plasma dust he'd swiped earlier that day. He'd palmed it during a drill, slipping it into a tiny metal case while Vera was busy yelling at someone else. This stuff's wild, he muttered, squinting at the scanner's readings. Explosive as hell. Bet it'd wake up a soup. He jotted notes in a messy scrawl, words like he'd index and kick, none of which made sense for a weapon. Outside, the Zoryth were on edge. General Kale stood in the command center, staring at a wall of screens showing live feeds from every corner of the training compound. His scales clicked rhythmically, a tick he couldn't shake since Richard arrived. Report, he barked at his aide. The younger Zoryth shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we found a discrepancy. Tank 13 is down 0.2 grams of plasma dust. No breaches, no alerts, just gone. Kale's eyes narrowed. That's impossible. Check the footage. They did 3 times but the cameras showed nothing. No one in, no one out. Just Richard wandering too close to the racks earlier, then backing off when Vera shoved him. Kale didn't buy it. He's behind this, he said, voice low. I don't know how, but he is. He ordered a full sweep, more guards, tighter locks, and a recalibration of the motion sensors. If he's stealing, we'll catch him. The aide hesitated. Sir, accusing him without proof could tank the program. Earth won't like it. Kale's scales cracked sharply. I don't care what Earth likes. This is our weapon. Our rules. He sent the order, and the compound buzzed with activity as soldiers scrambled to comply. Richard, oblivious to the storm brewing, kept working. He'd rigged his scanner to double as a chemical analyzer, tweaking it with parts scavenged from his flight kit. The plasma dust glowed faintly under the light, a tiny pile of red death. Structure's nuts, he whispered. Like N on steroids. Needs salt, maybe. He wasn't just guessing, he was testing. He'd already burned a speck on a metal strip, watching it flare up and leave a scorch mark. Potent, he grinned, scribbling more notes. His plan was simple, figure out what made this stuff tick, then see if it could be more than a weapon. Earth could use a trick like this, he figured, though not the way the Zoryth thought. By dawn, Kale got another report, 0.3 grams missing from Tank 15. Same deal, the aide said, scales paling. No trace, no footage. Kale slammed a fist on the console, cracking its edge. He's mocking us. Right under our noses. He called Vera in, her red eyes blazing as she stormed through the door. You were right, Kale said. He's taking it. I want you to confront him now. Vera's lips curled into a vicious smile. Finally. Let me break him. Kale grabbed her arm. No blood. Not yet. Just shake him up. Get answers. Vera found Richard at the morning drill, leaning against a wall while the squad ran maneuvers. She marched over, dagger already half drawn. You're a thief, human, she hissed, shoving him hard. Richard stumbled, catching himself with a laugh. Whoa, Red, what's the beef now? She stepped closer, voice dripping venom. Plasma dust's disappearing, and you're the only one dumb enough to touch it. Where is it? Richard raised an eyebrow. You think I'm sneaking your magic sand? What did I do with it? Sprinkle it on my cereal. Vera's dagger flashed out, stopping an inch from his throat. Lie again, and I'll carve the truth out of you. Soldiers froze, watching. Richard didn't blink. You're real fun at parties, huh? Look, I haven't taken squat. Check my room if you're so sure. Vera's eyes burned, but Kale's voice crackled over her. Stand down, Lieutenant. We'll handle this. She sheathed the dagger, snarling. Next time, no one stops me. Richard dusted off his jacket, smirking. See you around, Red. But as she stormed off, he slipped a hand into his pocket, feeling the metal case. Close call. That night, Richard pushed harder. He'd rigged a tiny suction tool cobbled from his kit to grab another sample during a late equipment check. The guards were distracted, arguing over the new protocols, and he snagged a pinch from Tank 17. Back in his room, he ran it through the scanner, grinning as the readings spiked. This D set your mouth on fire, he chuckled, adding to his growing pile of notes. He hid the case under a loose floor panel, covering it with junk. Just a little more, he muttered. Then we're cooking. Kale, meanwhile, was losing it. The third theft, 0.2 grams, again hit like a punch. He stormed the security hub, scales cracking with every step. How's he doing this? He roared. The techs scrambled, pulling logs, but nothing showed. Sensors are clean, sir, one stammered. Maybe it's a glitch. Kale glared. No glitch steals my weapon. It's him. He ordered a trap, extra guards in the shadows, fake canisters rigged with trackers. Next time he moves, we've got him. Vera volunteered to lead the sting, her fury barely contained. He's laughing at us, sir. Let me end this. Kale shook his head. We catch him first. Then you can have your fun. As the compound locked down, Richard lay back on his cot, staring at the ceiling. He knew they were onto him. Vera's stunt made that clear, but he wasn't worried. Not yet. He'd been in tighter spots than this. One more sample, he whispered, closing his eyes. Then the real game starts. 10 nights into Richard Maxwell's stint on Zoryn, the tension in Calthar snapped like a brittle twig. General Kale had hit his limit. 3 thefts, 0.2 grams, 0.3 grams, 0.2 grams again had vanished from the plasma dust reserves, and every instinct screamed Richard was the culprit. The trap was set, fake canisters laced with trackers, guards hidden in the shadows, and a live feed streaming to Kale's command center. He moves tonight, I know it, Kale muttered, scales clicking as he stared at the screens. Vera stood beside him, dagger in hand, practically vibrating with rage. When we catch him, I'm gutting him, she growled. Kale didn't argue. At 2 a.m., the bait worked. Richard slipped out of his quarters, moving casual as ever, hands in his pockets. The cameras tracked him through the compound, past the training arena, straight to the main weapons vault. He didn't even glance at the shadows where 6 Zoryth guards crouched, their stone bodies blending with the walls. Kale leaned closer to the screen. Got you. Richard fiddled with the vault lock, a decoy rig to open, and stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing his fate. Kale led the charge, Vera and a dozen soldiers at his heels. They burst through the vault door, weapons raised, expecting a fight. What they found stopped them cold. Richard sat cross-legged on a storage crate, a canister of plasma dust cracked open beside him. He held a handful of the crimson powder, tossing it into his mouth like it was popcorn. Man, this batch is spicy, he said, wincing as he chewed. Red dust clung to his lips, staining his teeth. He swallowed, coughed once, then grinned. Hits the back of the throat hard. The Zoryth froze, scales cracking in unison. Vera lunged, dagger flashing. You freak. I'll kill you. She swung, but Kale grabbed her arm mid-strike, wrenching her back. Wait, he barked, eyes locked on Richard. Why aren't you dead? The human shouldn't be sitting there, breathing, talking. Plasma dust was instant death. One speck on skin-dissolved flesh, a mouthful should have turned him to sand. Yet there he was, licking his fingers like he'd just raided a snack bar. Richard leaned back, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. Oh, this. Relax, big guy. Back on Earth, we'd call this a seasoning. Like chili powder, but way punchier. I'm into spicy stuff. He grabbed another pinch, popping it in his mouth while the Zoryth stared, dumbfounded. Vera broke free of Kale's grip, shoving her dagger against his chest. He's lying. No one eats that in lives. Richard didn't flinch. Check my pulse, Red. I'm fine. You guys are freaking out over nothing. Kale's mind raced. He waved a medic over, a wiry Zoryth with a scanner. Test him. Now. The device beeped, sweeping Richard's body. No cellular damage, the medic stammered, scales paling. Vitals normal. It's impossible. Kale snatched the scanner, checking it himself. The readings didn't lie. Richard was unharmed, even with a lethal dose in his gut. How? Kale demanded, voice cracking like dry stone. Richard shrugged. Human thing, I guess. We've got tough stomachs. Ever try hot wings? Same vibe. Vera wasn't having it. She kicked the canister off the crate, sending a puff of plasma dust into the air. He's a monster. Execute him before he spreads this madness. The powder hit the floor, sizzling faintly, but Richard just sneezed and laughed. Waste of good stuff, Red. That's prime grade right there. Kale held up a hand, silencing her. No. We need answers. He turned to Richard, scales grinding. You've been stealing it. Why? What's the game? Richard stretched, cracking his knuckles. No game, General. Just business. This dust? It's gold on Earth. Exotic alien spice people would pay a fortune. I've been sampling, testing. Figured out it's not a weapon to us, it's a flavor. He pulled a small vial from his pocket, shaking the red grains inside. This could be huge. Think high-end restaurants, specialty markets. You're sitting on a cash cow, and you don't even know it. The vault went silent, save for Vera's heavy breathing. Kale's scales stopped clicking as the words sank in. A weapon that defined their power, their terror, reduced to food? You're insane, he muttered. Vera spat on the floor. He's a liar and a thief. We can't let this stand. She raised her dagger again, but Kale shoved her back. Enough. We test this. If he's telling the truth, everything changes. He glared at Richard. If you're lying, you're dead. Richard grinned, unfazed. Test away. But trust me, this stuff's gonna blow your minds figuratively, I mean. He grabbed another handful, munching away as the Zoryth watched in horror. The vault door clanged shut behind them, locking in the strangest standoff Calthar had ever seen. Kale's gut twisted. This wasn't just a breach, it was a reckoning. The vault's heavy silence broke as General Kale's voice cut through, sharp and unsteady. Test him again. I want proof. His scales clicked faintly, betraying the chaos churning inside. Richard Maxwell sat there, still chewing plasma dust like it was a handful of trail mix, grinning through red-stained teeth. The medic scrambled back with a scanner, running it over Richard's chest, then his head, then his hands. No damage, the medic repeated, voice trembling. Heart rate steady, no cellular breakdown. It's like it's nothing to him. Kale snatched the device, staring at the green readings. Impossible, didn't even cover it. Vera wasn't buying it. She paced the vault, dagger twitching in her grip. He's faking it. Some human trick, poison resistance, maybe. We can't trust this. She kicked the spilled plasma dust, sending a faint red haze into the air. Richard sneezed again, wiping his nose. Geez, Red, you're wasting the good stuff. That's top shelf right there. Kale ignored her, locking eyes with Richard. Prove it. Show us it's safe. Richard shrugged, hopping off the crate. Sure thing, boss. Got any meat around here? A guard fetched a slab of dried rations, tough, gray stuff the Zoryth ate on patrols. Richard grabbed it, sprinkled a pinch of plasma dust from his vial, and took a big bite. He chewed slow, wincing a bit. Spicy as hell, but solid. Needs salt. He swallowed, then held out the rest. Anyone wanna try? The Zoryth recoiled, scales cracking in disgust. Kale stared, waiting for Richard to keel over. Nothing. The medic scanned again, still normal. He's fine, the medic whispered. It's food to him. Kale's mind reeled. Plasma dust, their ultimate weapon, the terror of the galaxy, was a snack to this human. He waved the medic off, turning to Richard. You're serious? You think this is, what, a business? Richard nodded, leaning against the crate. Dead serious. Earth loves spicy food, hot sauce, chili contests, you name it. This stuff? It's next level. Call it Zoryn fire, slap a fancy label on it, and you've got a gold mine. High-end chefs would kill for this. He tapped the vial. Exotic, alien, dangerous vibe marketing's a slam dunk. Vera exploded. This is blasphemy. Our sacred weapon a spice? I'd rather die than see it sold to your kind. She lunged at Richard, but two guards grabbed her, pinning her arms. Let me go, she snarled, thrashing. He's humiliating us. Kale's scales cracked louder. Stand down, Lieutenant. That's an order. Vera glared, chest heaving, but she stopped fighting. The guards held her tight, her red eyes burning holes into Richard. Kale rubbed his temple, scales grinding. If this is true, it changes everything. Our defense, our power, it's a lie against humans. Richard perked up. Not a lie, just a misunderstanding. You've got a killer product here. I say we team up. Zoryth supply, Earth markets. Split the profits. Everyone wins. Kale didn't respond right away. He paced, mind racing. The High Council would lose it. Decades of military pride turned into a trade deal. But the numbers made sense. Earth's credits could fund their war machine better than fear ever did. Vera broke the silence, voice low and venomous. You're fools if you buy this. He's a thief and a con. I won't let our legacy rot in human kitchens. She yanked free of the guards, pointing her dagger at Kale. Agree to this, and I'll burn it all down myself. The threat hung heavy. Kale faced her, scales still. You'd defy me? Start a mutiny over this. Vera didn't blink. If it saves our honor, yes. The vault buzzed with tension, soldiers shifting uneasily. Richard watched, quiet for once, like he knew he'd lit a match. Kale made his call. We test it further. Lock him up, run labs. If he's right, we talk trade. If he's wrong, he's yours, Vera. She smirked, satisfied for now. Richard raised his hands. Fair enough. Just don't skimp on the samples. I've got recipes to tweak. Guards cuffed him, hauling him out as he whistled a tune. Kale followed, barking orders. Secure the vault. Double the watch. No one breathes a word of this. The soldiers nodded, but whispers were already spreading. In the lab, Zoryth scientists poked and prodded Richard, feeding him controlled doses of plasma dust. Every scan came back clean. His body shrugged it off like water. Told you, he said, grinning through a mouthful. Spice, not death. Kale watched through a window, scales silent for the first time in days. He's not lying, he muttered to an aide. But Vera's not wrong either. This could split us. The aide shifted. Sir, if she rallies the ranks, we're done. She's got loyalists. Kale nodded, grim. Keep her close. I'll handle Maxwell. He glanced at Richard, now chatting up a scientist about flavor profiles. The human was a curveball, dangerous in ways plasma dust never was. Vera's threat loomed, but so did the chance of a new era. Kale clenched his fists. One wrong move, and this blows up. From him or her. The lab door shut, locking in a truce as shaky as Zoryn's sands. 2 weeks after the Vault showdown, Calthar buzzed with a fragile new normal. General Kale had brokered an uneasy truce. Richard Maxwell stayed under lock and key, but the Zoryth were testing his wild idea. Labs churned out data. Plasma dust, their feared weapon, was indeed harmless to humans, a fiery spice instead of a death sentence. Kale had grudgingly pitched it to the High Council, and after hours of shouting, they'd greenlit a trial run. Zoryn fire was born, small batches packaged in sleek, black vials, shipped to Earth for a test market. Richard, still cuffed in a guarded lab, grinned through the bars. Told you it'd work. You're welcome. Kale wasn't celebrating. His scales clicked nonstop as he paced the command center, staring at profit projections. Earth credits were rolling in. Restaurants clamored for the stuff, calling it the galaxy's hottest kick. But the victory felt hollow. Vera's rebellion simmered just below the surface. She'd backed off after the lab results, but her red eyes still burned with hate every time Richard's name came up. She's rallying troops, an aide warned Kale that morning. Whispers of a coup. They are calling this a betrayal. Kale rubbed his temple, scales grinding. Keep her in line. We can't afford a war inside our own ranks. Richard, meanwhile, played his part. From his cell, he coached Zoryth techs on branding fancy labels, bold fonts, a tagline, "Feel the burn of Zoryn." He even sketched bottle designs on scraps of paper, sliding them under the door. "Make it look badass," he said. People eat up the danger vibe. Kale watched the shipments leave, each crate a gamble. If this failed, Vera wouldn't just take his head, she'd torch the whole deal and dance on the ashes. The final meeting came on a blistering afternoon. Kale gathered his top officers in a sealed chamber, stone walls muffling the hum of Calthar outside. Richard sat at the table's end, cuffs off for once, flanked by guards. "Update," Kale barked. An aide slid a tablet forward. "Earth's sales are through the roof. They want more, double the supply. Calling it a luxury spice." Richard leaned back, smirking. "See? I'm your golden goose. Let's scale this up, joint venture, 50-50 split. We'll be swimming in cash." Kale's scales clicked slower, considering it. The numbers didn't lie. Vera crashed the party. She stormed in, dagger drawn, 3 loyalists at her back. "This ends now," she roared, slamming the blade into the table. The wood splintered, and the room went dead quiet. "You're selling our soul to this thief. I won't stand for it." Kale shot to his feet, scales cracking loud. "Stand down, Lieutenant. This is bigger than your pride." Vera laughed, bitter and sharp. "Pride? You've got none left. He's played you all." She pointed at Richard, who just raised an eyebrow. "What's her deal, man?" "She's obsessed." Kale stepped between them, voice low. "Vera, we're winning. Credits, power more than war ever gave us. Back off, or you're done." She didn't budge. "Winning? He's a liar. Ask him where the first samples went." The room froze. Kale turned to Richard, scales still. "What's she talking about?" Richard shrugged, casual as ever. "Beats me. She's paranoid." But Vera smirked, pulling a COMM device from her belt. "I intercepted a signal, weak one. He sent something off-world. Check it." Kale's gut twisted. He nodded to an aide, who hacked the logs. Seconds later, the screen flared, a transmission, dated 10 days back, coordinates locked on Earth. "Encrypted," the aide said. "But it's his signature." Kale's eyes locked on Richard. "Explain." "Now." Richard sighed, leaning forward. "All right, fine. I sent a sample home first week. Tiny one, proof of concept. Earth's been cooking with it ever since. Labs cracked the formula days ago. You're late to your own party." The air sucked out of the room. Kale's scales cracked like gunfire. "You what?" Richard grinned, unrepentant. "Business, man. I saw the gold mine, took a cut. You've got the source, but we've got the recipe now. Synthetic Zoryn, fire cheaper, faster. Hits shelves next month." Vera lunged, dagger flashing. "Traitor." She slashed, catching Richard's arm as he dodged. Blood hit the floor, red as the dust outside. Guards tackled her, but she fought like a cornered beast, screaming, "He's ruined us." Chaos erupted. Vera's loyalists drew weapons, clashing with Kale's guards. Blades rang against stone, and a stray shot of plasma dust, real stuff, not the fake vials, burst from a canister, dissolving a chair into sand. Kale roared, "Enough," but no one listened. Richard ducked under the table, clutching his arm, still grinning like a madman. "Told you it'd blow up," he yelled over the noise. Vera broke free, charging him again, but Kale body slammed her into the wall, pinning her. Stop, or I kill you myself. She spat in his face, scales trembling. You're already dead to me? The fight died fast. Guards outnumbered the rebels, cuffing Vera and her crew. Kale stood over Richard, breathing hard. You played us. From day one. Richard climbed out, wincing as he pressed his jacket to the cut. Not personal, General. Just smart. Earth's got the edge. Now you can join or fight. Your call. Kale's fists clenched, scales silent for once. He had seconds to decide: kill Richard, bury this mess, and pray Earth didn't retaliate, or let it ride and lose everything to human greed. Before he could move, the sky roared. A shadow loomed over Calthar. Dozens of Earth ships, sleek and armed, dropping through the haze. A voice crackled over the comms, loud and clear: this is Earth Command. Stand down, Zoryth. Maxwell's hours touch him, and we level this place. Soldiers poured from the ships, parachutes blooming red against the suns. Kale stared, scales frozen. Vera laughed, hoarse and broken. Told you. We're finished. Richard stood, brushing off his jacket. Guess my ride's here. Thanks for the hospitality, folks. Keep the samples souvenirs. He waved, strolling toward the exit as Earth troops breached the compound. Kale drew his blade, stepping forward, but a laser dot hit his chest. Sniper lock. He stopped, scales cracking one last time. You've started a war, he growled. Richard glanced back, grin fading. Maybe. Or just a really good business. See ya. The ships landed, troops swarming Calthar. Vera, cuffed and raging, screamed curses as they dragged her off. Kale stood alone, blade limp, watching Richard board a craft. The human had flipped their world. Plasma dust wasn't a weapon or a spice anymore, it was a fuse, and he'd lit it. Earth had the formula, the ships, the upper hand. Zoryth could fight, but the cost would bury them. Kale sheathed his weapon, turning to the chaos. Regroup, he barked to his surviving officers. This isn't over. As the ships lifted off, Richard leaned out, saluting with a bloody hand. Calthar shrank below, a speck in the sand. Kale's choice loomed: bow to Earth's game or burn it all down. He didn't know yet, but the suns above burned hotter, and the dust swirled like a promise of blood. And there you have it, folks, the wildest ride on Zoryn we've ever taken. Richard Maxwell didn't just eat the plasma dust, he turned it into a galactic game changer and left General Kale with a choice that could spark a war, or something even weirder. What do you think happens next? Does Zoryth fight back, or do they join the spice trade? Drop your predictions in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your take. If you dug this insane twist, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to Sci-Fi Space, hit that bell so you never miss our next trip into the unknown. Check out this video right here for more alien craziness, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay curious, space explorers.